Okay, Boker Tov, everybody. Pleasure to welcome you to our continuing series, Tanach 24-8. And today we're going a little bit out of order, and I don't want to say in honor, but in preparation for Tisha B'Av. It's a pleasure to have Rabbi Dr. Joshua Berman, who will be giving a talk on Megillat Eichah, a little bit out of order, and in a sense not really so much out of order because it's Yirmiyahu. So it's in a sense it's Yeshayahu Yirmiyahu, but Yirmiyahu's book on Eichah. Rabbi Berman is a graduate of Princeton University, Yeshivat Har Etzion. He currently is a professor of Tanach at Bar Ilan University. He's the author of many books. His most recent book being Ani Mamim, Biblical Criticism, Historical Truth, and the 13 Principles of Faith, just came out recently by Maggie. There's an article in Tradition. And Rabbi Dr. Berman, I think, is an amazing combination of profound scholarship. He's a real biblical scholar in the academic sense, complete sense, and yet someone who's completely faithful to our tradition. And he bridges the difficult, it's a difficult, path often, especially in the area of Bible. And I think Rabbi Berman is really one of the experts, drawing fidelity to our tradition with academic truth and rigor. And it's a pleasure to welcome you to our series on Tanach. B'vakasha, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you, Rabbi Kelman, and good day to everyone, wherever you may be, near or far. Friends, Megillat Eichah is a real puzzle. It's a puzzle because there is no book that we read year in and year out as part of our regular services on an annual basis about which we know so little. We sit there each year on the night of Tisha B'Av, and you try to follow what's going on, and it is almost hopeless. You just get lost. You get a sense, yes, there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of depictions of very difficult things, images that remind us certainly of the Shoah, but to go beyond that and say, well, what is this book about? Is it just telling about pain? Is there order? Is there a beginning, a middle, an end? Why does Perek Aleph discuss what it discusses? Why does Perek Gimel discuss what it discusses? And I think that for most of us, these questions are just entirely up in the air. And if someone were to present you with the question, what is the order of the prakim of Megillat Eichah? Most of us would just have to raise our hands and say, wow, that's really beyond me. And so what I want to try to do today is to give an orientation that I have, it's my orientation to Megillat Eichah, currently at work on a commentary on Megillat Eichah, and I want to share with you some of the guiding principles that I have about this, and to demonstrate my approach to Megillat Eichah through learning together with you Perek Aleph of the Megillah. We cannot just jump into the text. The text is closed. It requires introductions. In fact, it requires 4 sets of introductions before we begin. And so we're going to now do that. The first introduction is the purpose of this book. What is the purpose of Megillat Eichah? Well, Chazal call it kinot. That lashon, kinot, literally laments or lamentations, as it's called in English, obviously, does not appear within the Megillah itself. But I think that usually shades the way in which we look at this book. Oh, this is an outpouring of grief. There is a lot of grief, but I don't think that is really what the book is about. Some of you may have noticed the book, many of the prakim, several of the prakim are acrostics. The first pasuk is Aleph, Eichah Badad. The second pasuk begins with a bet, Bachotiv Keba Laila, and on and on. And I don't know anyone who, in just sort of a spontaneous outpouring of grief and pain, manages to do things in an acrostic way, like to go, hey, awful, bad, very bad, gimel, gewalt. It just doesn't work that way. This is clearly a very controlled and carefully structured work. My proposition, friends, is that Eichah is not really a lament. It's not a kinah, or at least not initially. That is not the initial purpose of its writing. When Yirmiyahu Hanavi wrote Megillat Eichah, he was doing so not in order to record the pain or the events of the Chorban for posterity, for readers in a later age. The purpose of writing Megillat Eichah for Yirmiyahu Hanavi was for the audience itself that was living at the time, the survivors of the Chorban, those who were disoriented, those who were traumatized, those who were dealing, friends, with questions that had never arisen before, beyond the terrible pain and the horrors and the trauma. a whole host of theological problems and issues came to the fore. Never before in the history of Klal Yisrael had the vast majority of Am Yisrael been shipped out of the country. What would that mean? Never before, certainly the 400 or 500 years that preceded, had Am Yisrael not had a Beit Mikdash. What would be with that? What's the meaning of all this? Does this mean that the Brit is finished? Or is it not finished? Or maybe does it mean that God doesn't exist? Or that God is impotent when we thought that he was omnipotent? All of these questions come to the fore. And if maybe in our own time, questions that have arisen in the wake of the Shoah, and a long tradition, unfortunately, for the Jewish people of suffering, at the time of Churban Bayit Rishon, these questions were all very, very new and very burning and very potent, with different people pulling in different directions. Yirmiyahu isn't the only person who survived the Churban. Many simple folk also survived the Churban and were wrestling with these questions and giving different answers. And to just sort of drive home just how pressing these issues were, it's a little bit different than the very pressing questions that aroused for the Jewish people in the wake of the Shoah. Because in the wake of the Shoah, very quickly, in terms of historical time, we were given Medinat Yisrael, which doesn't explain all of the difficult questions from the Shoah, but it did manage to, I would say, draw our collective national attention away from trauma and toward rebirth, and with something new and exciting and rejuvenating to focus on, maybe those extremely difficult questions about the Churban that was the Shoah, maybe we left those aside. But if you're living in Yerushalayim and Yehuda 10, 20, 30 years after the Churban, nothing is getting better and life is miserable, then these questions really threaten the very state of Am Yisrael at time. And so the purpose of Megillat Eichah, I am going to claim, is Yirmiyahu is looking to address his fellow citizens, his fellow residents of Yehuda, of Yerushalayim, the survivors of the Churban. And he's doing so with an eye towards leading them towards collective spiritual rehabilitation, to give them an orientation about how to relate to the events that befell them. That is our first introduction, the purpose of the Megillah. Our second introduction has to do with the form in which Yirmiyahu does this. And I claim that Megillat Eichah is a drama, literally a drama, like a play, yes, characters. In fact, I have taught Megillat Eichah, and at the end of the course, I have assigned the roles, and we'll talk about the roles in a minute and how we know where they are and who's what. I have assigned roles to my students, and they have put on the Megillah in front of the rest of the class. Now, I'm sure all of you might have Tanachim in front of you. If you open to Eichah, you will not see it. Does not look like a script, like in Shakespeare, with the name of the character and then they say. So how do we know who's who? So let me bring up onto our screen the main sheet that we are going to be using today. Okay. This is all visible, yeah? Rabbi Kelman, this came up nicely. You see it?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay, terrific. Very good. All right, let me minimize the ribbon. If I can do that. Let's see. Auto hide ribbon. There we go. Excellent. Okay. And okay. Good. Now, what do we have? What do we have here? Just one moment. I am going to. There we go. Okay. Put Rabbi Kelman over here. Good. Okay. Yeah. What we have here, I have the text of Megillat Eichah, but it's a little bit different than it might appear in your Tanachim. First of all, I have cut it out by what we call stitch or clause. That is, this is poetry. And it's very important to look at each clause or each stitch, each separate little part of a sentence of the poetry. And each pasuk has usually 3 or 4 of these stitches. And I have labeled them 1A, 1B, 1C, so that pasuk aleph takes up all of the first 3 lines, Eichah yashva badad, ha'ira bati'am, etc. And because the language is sometimes a little bit difficult, I have a linear translation for you on the left. I'm going to be working with our text here on the right. And for those of you that might lose a word here and there, you can just look over to the corresponding line on the left, and you'll have the translation there for you. Now, I asked the question before, so how do we know who these different characters are? And I want to say the following. We have in Megillat Eichah, and for our purposes today, Perek Aleph, all the times that Yerushalayim is spoken about, it's done in one of two ways. Sometimes Yerushalayim is spoken about in the third person. For example, Eichah yashva badad. How does she sit alone? Right? We're speaking about Yerushalayim. This is third person. When we see speech in the third person, then we are going to say that this is the narrator speaking to us. Okay? The person who has written Megillat Eichah, Yirmiyahu Navi. You know what? Let's call it Yirmiyahu Navi. Okay? This is Yirmiyahu speaking. Okay? So Bachol tifkeh balayla, she cries at night. This is Yirmiyahu. Okay? That's one character. But then we have other characters. For example, if you look, I don't know, we'll just take here, Pasuk Tet Zayin 16. Okay? Al ele ani bochia, eini yordamayim, kirachak mimeni menachem meshiv nafshi. Here, this speaker is speaking about Yerushalayim in the first person. And here, we are going to assume that this is no longer Yirmiyahu speaking. This is a character that I'm going to call Bat Sion. Bat Sion is a collective representation of the survivors of the Chorban, the residents of Yerushalayim. Okay, and you can see in my Tanach that the parts have been given out. As you can see, there's some in black and some in purple. I've done that to help us follow along as we're reading, so that at every moment we can tell, both by the diktuk, you know, whether it's speaking of Yerushalayim in third person, then it's Yirmiyahu, or in first person, then it's Bat Sion speaking, and setting it off in this way, in purple and in italics. That'll help us follow along what each of these characters is saying as we go through the Perek. So we have here, as I said, we have two characters, Bat Sion and Yirmiyahu Hanavi. Now, let me just say a little bit about what is being done here. The interplay between the dialogue, maybe the argument sometimes that we're going to see between Yirmiyahu and between Bat Sion. You know, the best way to think about this, I would say, is from something I just saw a few weeks ago. Maybe you, wherever you live, you saw something similar too. I saw an ad. It was a little video. I don't know. I was on one of the local newspapers here in Israel, and there was an ad about a little video ad. I don't know, from the Ministry of Health about washing hands, how to wash one's hands. Okay, and it says to wash your hands takes a full minute. Yes, and they show all the ways to wash hands. It's not just rub-a-dub-dub and we're all finished. Oh, no. There's doing this and doing this and doing this and doing this. And they go through all the steps, okay? Now, the way they did this is that they had some very normative-looking woman, you know, who looks like any typical Joe Yisraeli, washing her hands dutifully and slowly and carefully and in all the nooks and crannies and crevices. And it took her a full minute. And that was the video. Now, why do I raise that? Because what is happening in that video? There's a woman, but the truth is, none of us spend a whole minute washing our hands, or I have to admit, I don't spend a whole minute washing my hands. Maybe I should, okay? Clearly, the Ministry of Health thinks that I should, okay? And clearly, because the Ministry of Health here believes that most people should, and most people don't, this is why they created this little video, to give you a model of what you should be doing. This is how you should be washing your hands. Now, that kind of little trivial example is exactly what's happening in Eichah. Yirmiyahu is carrying on a dialogue with Bat Sion. But what we're going to see is that Bat Sion is going to develop from her first statements until her last statements. She's going to undergo a tahalich, a process of growth. She is meant to be a model for the audience of the Megillah who are the residents of Yehuda and Yerushalayim, the survivors of the Churban. They are not quite yet where she is at and where she gets to. Just like I am not quite yet at the level of spending a full minute washing my hands like that ideal, typical woman in the ad that I mentioned before. Okay, so the characters of Yirmiyahu and Bat Sion are really, it's the way in which Yirmiyahu is trying to address his fellow citizens and give them a model of what it is that he expects them to achieve. Okay, so we've spoken about the purpose of the Megillah, to help Am Yisrael grapple. We've spoken about the form of the Megillah, that it's a drama, a dialogue with parts back and forth. Third introduction, we need to understand something about the psychology of suffering, because Am Yisrael are suffering. And all of us know that when Rahman al-Litzlan were suffering, that is exactly the very last time, it's the worst time to hear that we're wrong about something. That is, most of us really never do like to hear tochacha. We don't want to hear about the things we're doing wrong, but our capacity, our openness to hearing that we need to correct something is lowest, is most resistant against precisely when we're suffering. Like, I can't hear that now. I'm suffering already. Isn't my suffering already enough? And now you're going to come and tell me that I'm doing something wrong? It's very, very hard to address someone when they're suffering. In fact, I would almost say that when we suffer, we almost adopt and adapt for ourselves an air of purity. Like, I'm suffering, and so therefore I must be pure. Now, just to give an example, I knew a woman who was a survivor. Her name was Fanya Gottesfeld Heller, big Balat Staka, most of her life. And she wrote up her memoir, her Holocaust memoirs, and it was a little different than what had come out from other survivors. She wrote about how when she and her family were in hiding in a chicken coop in Poland, they were sustained by a Ukrainian soldier who would bring them food on a regular basis. And she fell in love with this Ukrainian soldier, and they, wouldn't call it an affair. She wasn't married, but they had a romance. She and this obviously Goyisha Ukrainian soldier. And maybe that's why he brought them food. This is not your typical Holocaust story. And then when the war ended and he proposed to her, she said bye, and off she went, and a few days later married a Jew. When she came out with this story, a lot of survivors were very upset. They said, we know that such things happened. It's not that what you said didn't happen, or we know how much this happened, things like this. But it's not a good story to tell, because it creates complexity. It says that maybe in some way people at that time were at fault, but we suffered. And so therefore no fault at all from any angle can ever be ascribed to us. So when we suffer, our capacity to hear tochacha goes way down. But it's precisely sometimes when we suffer, when we've brought the suffering upon ourselves, that we need to be open to it. So how do you do that? What do you do when you have let's say this is an issue that I have faced many times. What do you do when you have a good friend and you see that friend engaging in self-destructive behavior? It could be the way they run their business is full of delusions and they're driving themselves into the ground, or they are workaholics, or anything that is really leading to ruining their lives. You see it, they don't see it. And probably because it's ruining their lives, they're suffering. And what, as you as a good friend, how do you handle that? This is a very difficult question, because if you say, I think you're doing something really wrong, you run the risk. What do you mean I'm wrong? Who are you? Who asked you? And then what happens with your friendship? Kaput. So sometimes even the best friends, maybe Dafka the best friends, will feel, I see what's going on. It isn't good. I know it isn't good. Other people also feel it isn't good, but I can't. How can I just tell him he's doing wrong? A really true friend will know you have to find a way to say this. How do you do it? When do you do it? I have done this once. I can recall once being in this dilemma. And I knew that the key to doing this effectively was to not come finger wagging. Look what you're doing. You're ruining everything. I'm smart. You should listen to me. Oh, no. The best way to come is with tons of love and support. And that everything that you say should come where it's very clear to the person you're talking to that you are with them. You are not scolding them. You're really doing this because you love them, and it's all out of love. This is the way in which Yirmiyahu will need to approach Bat Zion. As we're going to see, this is not the Yirmiyahu that we recognize from Sefer Yirmiyahu. If I understood correctly, Rabbi Kelman, that's coming up next in a few weeks' time. Okay, we have all seen enough, certainly in the Haftarot from the last few weeks. For those of us that have read the Haftarot, if you weren't in shul, the Haftarot, Yirmiyahu has quite a tongue, but that's the tongue that comes, the tongue lashing that comes before the Churban. After the Churban, when Am Yisrael are deep in pain, it's a different tongue, and it's a different approach. And the ways in which he is going to intimate that there might be something wrong are going to be much more muted than we said before. And every word that even hints of tochacha will be surrounded with lots and lots of empathy. So we've given so far 3 introductions: the purpose of the Megillah, the form of the Megillah as dialogue, as drama, the psychology of how to share with someone things they need to hear, even though they might not want to hear them. And finally, before we actually begin to open the Megillah, we have to share something about the imagery in this parak. And for that, I want to share another sheet. Here we are. Okay. What do we have here? 1 minute. I'll hide the ribbon. Okay. Good. The imagery in Eichah Parak Aleph. The imagery here is really beautiful and multi-layered. And I want to show you 3 layers of the imagery that we have here. Before we get to Eichah itself, I want to talk about something called the Vassal Treaty. This is something that's extremely important for understanding Brit Sinai, and so I want to talk about this first. This is something that existed in ancient Near Eastern culture. What would happen is that you would have a weaker country, a weaker nation. Nation usually meant something small, like think of nations in Sefer Yehoshua, a city-state, basically. Where a weak city-state might be under siege, might have run out of food, and they appeal to a stronger city-state, maybe the strongest city-state in the area, and they say, Hatzilu, Hatzilu, come and save me. And that stronger city-state will send relief, whether it's soldiers to break the siege, or whether it's food to relieve the famine. And then that weaker city-state becomes what's called a vassal to the sovereign. Now, what does that mean? Not Eved. He doesn't become enslaved. He doesn't give up his autonomy, but he becomes a kind of, I would say, a junior partner to the sovereign king, to that stronger power, that stronger king. And the stronger king would then draw up a treaty that everyone understood was incumbent upon the vassal as a kind of hakaras hatov. Okay, so that treaty would lay out all sorts of obligations and loyalties that the vassal has to the sovereign. When there's a war, the vassal should send troops. On a regular basis, the vassal should send taxes to the sovereign king. Okay? And in return for being a loyal vassal to the sovereign would offer protection to the vassal. So the vassal would know that if he was ever attacked by another party, then he knew that he could rely on the sovereign to come and rescue him. Okay? These vassal treaties would also stipulate that in the event that the vassal did not fulfill his obligations and loyalties, well, then the sovereign would also be off the hook, and he would be able to withdraw protection from the vassal and maybe even attack the vassal. Okay? Now, when a vassal felt that or had been disloyal and no longer had the protection of the sovereign, then typically the vassal would then look for another nation, another king, whom to make a treaty. Okay, this is something that goes on throughout the ancient Near East. Okay, now, it turns out that the concept that we have of a brit between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Am Yisrael at Har Sinai is patterned exactly after this. That is, Israel, the weaker side, appeals to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in Yetzias Mitzrayim, or before Yetzias Mitzrayim. Vayizaku b'nei Yisrael min avodah vayizaku. Right? So they call to Hashem. Hashem then gives deliverance. Okay? And he saves Am Yisrael. Well, now it's obvious that there now needs to be a treaty, a vassal treaty between the vassal, Am Yisrael, and the Kadosh Baruch Hu, in which there are treaty obligations and loyalties, or what we call the mitzvot, 613 of them. Okay? And the Kadosh Baruch Hu says, just like the sovereign does to the vassal, Shem says to Am Yisrael, you do my treaty obligations and loyalties, the mitzvot, you will have protection. I will protect you. You'll go into Eretz Yisrael. You'll defeat all the nations there. You won't have to worry about them. Everything will be sababa, as they say here. However, what happens if Am Yisrael is not loyal, does not perform the mitzvot, and especially what happens if Am Yisrael looks to make connections with other nations, treaties with other nations? That, right? Tichrot brit, Hashem says at 3 points in the Torah. You're not allowed to make a brit with anyone else because you're supposed to rely on me, because I'm your sovereign. I'm the one that's supposed to give you protection. So if you're sufficiently disloyal to my treaty obligations, my mitzvot, and especially if you scout other powers for protection, whether they be other nations or whether they be chas v'shalom, other gods, well, then I am going to go into a state of hester panim. You are not going to have protection from me. In fact, I might even go on the attack, and you will have from me chorban. And when this begins to happen throughout Sefer Malachim, Am Yisrael become less and less loyal to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They do more and more avodah zarah. They engage more and more other countries to provide protection for them. Sometimes Ashur, sometimes Mitzrayim. They try to seek treaties with other nations. But of course, the more they seek treaties with other nations, the more HaKadosh Baruch Hu does hester panim, and the more he does chorban, until and it all blows up, and it becomes the chorban. Okay. Now, this reality, this kind of, I would say, scale of imagery, the vassal treaty is the paradigm for Brit Sinai. In the Megillah, this is mixed and married to, pardon the pun, the imagery of marriage, which is all the same. You have a protector, which is now the husband, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And you have, once upon a time, protected. That is the wife. That is Am Yisrael. And of course, the obligation of the protected in this paradigm is marital loyalty. You're not supposed to fool around with anybody else. And when you do make a treaty with another nation, when you do serve another god, that's like a wife being disloyal. And the consequences of disloyalty are divorce and maybe even revenge. Let me talk about that for just 1 second. You know, in our time, if a woman is, or let's be less sexist about it, if one party is disloyal to the other, that could well be grounds for a separation or even a divorce. However, in Yechezkel Tet Zayin, what we see is that when Israel, the wife, is disloyal to a Kadosh Baruch Hu, the husband, Kadosh Baruch Hu, the husband seeks revenge. Okay, right, wrong. This is what happens in Tanach. Okay, and this can lead to chorban. And along the way, as the husband is rescinding his protection of his increasingly disloyal wife, well, what is a woman to do when she feels that she doesn't have a lover, that she doesn't have a husband, that she doesn't have anyone to protect her? Well, just like a girl, sometimes when she loses a boyfriend, she might be what they call on the rebound. On the rebound. Yes, you go on the rebound and you try to find another boy. Oh, there's a guy with 2 legs. There, he's perfect. Because you need to have a guy, right? And so you get a guy and it gets bad and it breaks up. And then we quickly have to go find another guy. So the woman seeks other men as a protector or lover. This is what is described. This whole dynamic is the subject of Yechezkel Perek Tet Zayin as an extended metaphor between HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the husband, and Am Yisrael, the wife, ending in a great trial for the woman, which is the Chorban. Okay, this whole scheme is interwoven in the psukim of Eichah Perek Aleph. And with that, friends, we have concluded, fortunately not the shir, but it's taken us quite a while to give us our 4 introductions. What is the purpose of Eichah generally? What is its form as a drama, as dialogue? Particularly for our chapter, Eichah Aleph, to understand how delicately you have to tread when you try to approach a person who's suffering to get them to rethink things that are going on. And finally, this triad of sovereign and vassal, HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Am Yisrael, husband and wife. And so, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's begin Eichah Perek Aleph. Okay. So here we have it, as I said before, everything is split, all the psukim into their stitches, and with the parallel phrases on the left, you'll be able to follow that. Now, what you can see just quickly looking at it is that until we get to Pasuk Tet here, 9c, everything is initially a soliloquy by Yirmiyahu Hanavi. He opens up, okay? So we're going to read, my focus in the shir is going to be what happens when they start talking to each other, starting in Pasuk Tet, but we need to first see what happens in Psukim Aleph to the beginning of Tet. What we're going to see here is that Yirmiyahu is going to speak to Yerushalayim or about Yerushalayim gently, prodding a little bit about some of the problems, but not too much. And I would say setting out the points that he wants her to adopt in terms of her view of what just happened here. What was this thing, the Chorban? Who's responsible for it? Who did what? Okay, so here we go. Eichah yashva vadad. Ha'ira bati am hayta ke'almana. Rabati bagoyim. Sarati bamdinot. Hayta lamas. Okay, when Hashem says hayta ke'almana, he's not just saying, oh, she's such a nebuch, because like a widow is a nebuch. He's not just saying she's a nebuch. No, think of it. What is an almanah? Well, an almanah is a woman whose husband has deceased, right? Well, this is exactly what Bat Sion is thinking to herself. Here I am, it's the Chorban. Where's my husband? He doesn't seem to be around. He seems to be gone. Where is God? So for Bat Sion, she really does view herself as an almanah, not solely in her state of suffering, but in her state of, is there anybody out there for me? Is he there? Was he there? She truly sees herself as an almanah. And Yirmiyahu is ready to voice what she herself is thinking. This is one of the best ways to be compassionate. You know, sometimes people think if someone is really upset, you give them a big hug and say, don't cry, don't cry. That's the worst thing to say. The worst thing to say to somebody is, don't cry. Hey, want to cry? The best thing to say is, of course you're crying. Anyone going through what you're going through will cry. And so we're going to see time after time that Yirmiyahu affirms precisely what Bat Sion herself is feeling and thinking. So she's all alone. Yes, she's alone. What does it mean that she's alone? She is really alone. She has no man. She has none of her lovers. She has no support for her. Speaking as a woman, she has no man. Speaking as Am Yisrael, she has no treaty partners, neither the treaty partner above, who was supposed to be there for her, or the other treaty partners that she was looking for. She is now just alone, badad. Rabati bagoyim, sarati bamdinot, hayta lamas. She herself is clearly thinking, I can't believe, the huge precipice that I was on, how great things were, and boom, how far I've crashed down. Bachol tivke balayla, v'dimata alechya. Right? He is describing to her crying. I see that you're crying. there's almost nothing better that you can say to someone who is in distress than, "Oh, I see you're crying." That is just so comforting by itself. That is what Yirmiyahu is doing. Ein la menachem mikol ohaveha. This doesn't mean simply, oh, she's sitting shiva all by herself. Okay, in the age of Corona, this unfortunately is all too common. It's not just that she's sitting by herself. Ein la menachem mikol ohaveha. Ohaveha here, we need to understand that word. In modern Hebrew, I would translate as me'ahaveha, meaning her lovers. She has no comfort from all of her lovers, meaning the other men that she was chasing after when her true husband began to depart from her. Or put in the terms of treaty partners, as HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the sovereign, withdrew his protection from Am Yisrael, the vassal, then Am Yisrael sought treaties with other lovers, other Ohavim, Ashur, Mitzrayim, and some others along the way. Those lovers are not here now anymore to help her. Yes, that's exactly it. All of her Re'im Ahuvim of Pam, all of her former lovers betrayed her. They now participate in the Chorban. And there's a play on words here. Look, the difference between the word Oyev and the word Ohev is very small. Ohev and Oyev, it's one letter difference. The Ohavim became Oivim. Now, two psukim, notice, Yirmiyahu has not mentioned a word of criticism until now. Really, all that he has done is to express empathy, or to express, I would say, not so much empathy that he's enduring what she is. He has mirrored back to her what she is experiencing. He has mirrored back to her the way in which she looks at the situation, that she is an almanah because her husband is dead, that she has gone from very high down to very low. Let's continue. Galta Yehuda me'oni u'mirov avoda, hi yashva b'goyim lo matza manoach. He is simply describing all of her suffering, all of the things that she herself is dwelling on. No tochacha yet. Darchei Tzion avelot, mibali ba moed, kol she'area shomimin, kornea ne'anachim, betulotea nugot, vehi marla. Hayut sareh halosh, oivea shalu, Ki Hashem hoga al rov psha'eha. This is the first time, only in the middle of Pasuk Hey. Now hear that she's done something wrong. But I would say that more than just stating that she's done something wrong, Yirmiyahu is giving Bat Sion some food to think about. And that is the real question that she's dealing with here. We see this throughout the Kina, or I said it's not a Kina, throughout the chapter, throughout the drama, okay, it is not clear who is responsible for this thing that we call the Chorban. Or maybe it's clear to us, having been learning in Yirmiyahu and Chazal and all that, but for Bat Sion at the time, for the survivors of the Chorban at that moment, who is responsible for all this mess is not at all clear. And so Yirmiyahu wants to introduce the idea that ultimately, who is responsible for this mess? She is responsible for this mess. 5b, Ki Hashem Hogah, caused her yagon, al rov psha'eha. We're going to see she struggles with this idea. She starts talking. Let's continue on from 5c. Olaleha halchu shavi lifnei tzar. Vayetze mi bat Sion kol hadara. Hayusarea ka'ayalim lo matzu mir'eh. Vayelchu v'lo koach lifnei rodef. Zachra Yerushalayim yimei onya u'merudeha. She remembers all the days of her partying, let's say, all the days that things were great. What's described, let's say, in the time of Shlomo. You don't really have to listen to what HaKadosh Baruch Hu says. You can have lots of wives, you can do lots of avodah zarah, and have a party, and have a big mamlacha doing it. So she recalls now all of her former heights, the days of richness, the days of glory, maybe in the time of Shlomo, the end of Shlomo. Kol machamudea asher hayu mimei kedem, all the goodies that she had at that time. Now she thinks about these things, being pol amma biyad sar, ve'ein ozerla. Ra'uha sarim sachakua mishpateha. Now Yirmiyahu says in a little more louder tone, until now almost everything except for that one phrase in 5b, everything that Yirmiyahu has said, and through Pasuk Chet, has really been to describe the painful events that she herself is dwelling on, because he needs to earn credit. He needs to show her that he is aware of her suffering and even sympathetic to her suffering. Just like when you want to approach a friend and maybe indicate that something isn't quite the way it should be, you have to work double overtime before you do that to make sure that that other friend knows you love them. You love them unconditionally. And you're not coming at this as to criticize them, certainly not to lord over them, certainly not to talk down to them. 8b, Kol mechabdei zilua kira'u ervata, gam hi ne'encha avatashov achor. 9a, tum'ata b'shuleha. This phrase, some of Farshim understand the following. What does it mean, her dross is in her skirts? You see, the English doesn't always help. What does that mean? Some of Farshim say like this. As I mentioned, using the paradigm of husband and wife, the wife is disloyal. When the wife is disloyal, she sleeps around. And what Yirmiyahu is saying is, from all this activity of sleeping around, all of the filth that comes from intercourse is now all over her clothes. Tum ata b'shuleha, quite graphic. Lo zachra acharita. When she was having a good time, she didn't think about the consequences. Vatered playim, and now she's gone way down. Ein mechem la, nobody to comfort her. No lovers, certainly not the Ribono Shalom. Nobody to comfort her. And now, friends, look, it's purple. That means that this must be Yerushalayim. But how do we know? Because this next phrase is in first person. Re'eh Hashem et onyi, my suffering. Ki higdil oyev. Okay, it's a burst. It's a burst in the middle of the pasuk, in the middle of Yirmiyahu talking. Finally, something that he has said, or maybe the totality of what he has said, now leads her to wake, to awoken, to arouse, to speak. Now we'll look very carefully at this phrase. Re'eh Hashem et onyi ki higdil oyev. No difficult words there. I think we all got that. But it is a deceptively simple phrase. Friends, on the one hand, let's think about what I said is the purpose of this chapter, or of Eichah in general. The purpose of this chapter is to model the right behavior. Like that woman in the ad, washing her hands for a full minute, doing all these different steps, okay? Now, what I'm going to claim is the following, is that Bat Sion undergoes a process of growth and rehabilitation from Pasuk Tet that goes all the way until the end, that there are about 8 or 9 different stages of her growth. I want to look at this first phrase, okay? The truth is that Am Yisrael at this time are not turning to a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Just like I'm not washing my hands for a full minute. I don't do that, okay? What Yirmiyahu is putting up here is a first step of what he wants her to be saying. And so what we need to see, since it's a first step, on the one hand, what does it achieve? What is good here in what she is saying in terms of Yirmiyahu's ultimate goal of leading Bat Sion through spiritual growth? But since this is only a first step, we also need to identify in what sense is this phrase 9c defective? What is it missing in terms of her growth? So let's start. In terms of what's good, this is great. She calls to Hashem out of her distress. That's a good thing to do. That's a great place to start. If you are suffering, no matter how much you're suffering, no matter why you are suffering, even if you are suffering ultimately, as I might believe, that it's because of chataim that you've done, the first thing you need to do is to reconnect. Turn to him for help. So this is a good first step. However, it is not a final step. Because if you look carefully at 9c, there are actually some, I would say, mistaken theological points here. Re'eh Hashem et onyi ki higdil oyev. If she calls to Hashem, Re'eh Hashem et onyi. Hey, notice, I'm here suffering. That implies that she believes that maybe he doesn't notice her suffering, when in fact the Kadosh Baruch Hu is noticing everything. Moreover, What is it that she wants him to notice? Is that really what's happening? She is suffering because the enemy was strong? That is her perception of it. She didn't see Shemayim open up, right? There's no Kriyat Yam Suf at the Chorban. What she saw was Babylonians. What she saw was other nations, killing, raping, pillaging. So what she saw, what she experienced was Higdil Oyev. You should notice Higdil Oyev. This is a little off. She doesn't really understand the causality of here. She certainly does not say anything yet about her role, her complacency in what went on, her responsibility for what went on. That's not here yet. Because this 9C, friends, is the first step. Yirmiyahu wants her from her pain, call out. If you can do that, that's great. Let's move on. You can see that Pasuk Yud, starting from 10a, we're back in block letters in black. Or put differently, we're back in third-person descriptions of Yerushalayim. Yado paras tsar al kol machamadeha. Okay, al kol machamadeha. That's talking about Yerushalayim in third person. Now let's try to understand what Yirmiyahu is doing here. What Yirmiyahu is going to do, and we're going to see this now from here until the end. Never again in this parak does Yirmiyahu say anything bad about Yerushalayim. Never again does he remind her of her chata'im. Because she is now starting. She's on the path. She's going to move from step to step. And so the more that she begins to come around to his way of looking at things, the more he's going to express sympathy by, once again, mirroring and sometimes even, I would say, expanding on the emotions that she has expressed. She said, Higdil Oyev, Higdil Oyev, the Babylonians, see what they did to me. Oh, so Yirmiyahu says, okay, let's talk about Higdil Oyev. Yes, this was terrible what they did. Yado, referring to the Oyev, paras tsaro kol machamadea. And what else when she says Higdil Oyev? Ki ata goyim ba'u mikdasha. This is a double entendre, friends. On the one hand, it says, the residents of Yehuda saw the Babylonians streaming into the Mikdash. That's true. But on the axis of husband-wife intimacy, relations, illicit relations, what this is also saying is that she experienced rape. The goyim entered, right, Bia, okay, Mikdasha, her sanctuary. Okay, this is a clean way of describing the victimization of a woman. Asher tzivita lo yavou b'ka'alach. This is Yirmiyahu speaking. Asher tzivita. Who is he talking to here? Asher tzivita. He's talking to a Kadosh Baruch Hu in her presence. It's almost as if Yirmiyahu is saying, and I can't believe this happened. Look what you let happen. The Bavlim entering into the Mikdash, raping these women. Asher tzivita. These people who are so tameh, so puzzled, that in your Torah it says they're not even allowed to come in to be part of the kahal. Tzivita lo yavo the kahalach. Now, when Yirmiyahu, almost it would seem, scold the Kadosh Baruch Hu in her presence, that makes her feel, hey, this guy gets me. I like what Yirmiyahu is saying. This is someone that I can have a dialogue with. This is someone who I can listen to. Yirmiyahu is building up credit. Yirmiyahu continues, Kol aman enachim, mivakshim lechem, natnu machamadehem be'ochel, le'ashiv nefesh. 11c, back to the purple, which is to say, back to first person, which is to say, back to Bat Zion. She cuts him off again. Re'ei Hashem ve'arbia, ki hayiti zolela. Now let's try to unpack this. Again, my premise here is that every time Bat Zion speaks, she's moving up a little bit in her spiritual growth, in her proper grasping of the situation, in her understanding of what happened exactly at the Chorban. So we need to measure and read this phrase in light of the previous phrase in Pasuk Tet. They're quite similar. Re'eh Hashem et onyi ki gdi lo yev. Re'eh Hashem ve'abita ki hayiti zola. Well, let's see. What do we have here? It's not quite the same. This is even more emphatic. This was just Re'eh Hashem. But in 11c, she says, Re'eh Hashem ve'abita. Why is it more emphatic now? It's more emphatic because when she called out to him in Pasuk Tet, Re'eh Hashem et onyi. What did Hashem answer, friends? Not what did Yirmiyahu answer. I ask you, what did Hashem answer? You know what the answer to that is? An answer. She called out to him, and there was divine silence. Hashem doesn't always answer our tefillot. And sometimes we're so bad that we can call and call and call, and there's not going to be an answer. So in this dialogue that is being presented, this drama that is being presented to the residents of Yerushalayim, effectively what Yirmiyahu is saying is, folks, I want you to be like this woman here. I want you to call to Hashem. I want you to say to him as a first step, Re'eh Hashem et yi. And you know what, folks? You know what's going to happen when you call to a Kadosh Baruch Hu? Nothing. Nothing. Silence. He's not going to answer. And do you know what you should do? When Hashem is silent, when he does not answer your tefillot, call him again. Re'eh Hashem ve'abita. Call him again. That's what I want to see you do. So this phrase by itself is an enormous step up from number one. Even though the words are almost the same, the very fact that she is capable of calling to Hashem when he has not answered her first prayer is already quite a mila. Okay? And again, this is not what Am Yisrael are actually doing. The survivors of the Churban are clueless as to what's going on. They're tired of hearing about the Kadosh Baruch Hu. He is putting on a model for how they should be. Re'eh Hashem ve'abita ki hayiti zolila, right? Meaning, if I'm scrapping, literally scrapping for crumbs, as it is said, as was said here in the beginning of Pasuk Yud Aleph, I'm jumping at crumbs on the floor. Well, that's quite abject. But now this is also an advance over what we had back in Pasuk Tet, because in Pasuk Tet we said she wrongly said, there's a korban here, ki higdilo yev. That enemy, he's pretty strong, which is not exactly what was. Yes, the enemy is strong, but he's not the cause of the korban. She no longer makes that error. And so all of this phrase, 11c, is a little bit better than 9c was. Let's continue. 12a. She continues. Or let's put it this way, in Yirmiyahu's setup, he has her continue to speak. Lo alechem kol ovrei derech. She's talking to now to Yirmiyahu, not to Kadosh Baruch Hu, to passers-by. Think of a beggar on Thornwood Avenue there. Puts out his hand and the cars just drive by. Habitu ureu im yesh machov kemachov. Okay. Now, why does Yirmiyahu have Bat Sion no longer speaking to a Kadosh Baruch Hu? Right? She's kind of put aside a Kadosh Baruch Hu, and she's now speaking to whoever will pass by. And I think it's a concession to Bat Sion, because what he's saying to her is, Bat Sion, dear fellow residents of Yerushalayim, I want you to call the Kadosh Baruch Hu. And when he doesn't answer, I want you to call to him again. And I know that there's going to be a lot of silence for a long time. And so I am within the space of this drama, I am going to allow you to look for other solace. See if you can find the Chama from any around. This is necessary, because Yerushalayim will need to see that it truly is, at the end of the day, no other address. No one's going to save her. No one is going to comfort her. And so he has Bat Sion flirt with the idea of finding solace from another source. Lo alechem kol avrei derech. Oh, passers-by, notice me. Habitu ureu im yesh machov kemachovi. She goes on. Asher olal li. Asher hoga Hashem biyom charon apo. This too is another madrega up, because now for the first time, she understands the Churban was not because the Bavlim were very strong. It's because who's very strong? Hashem is very strong. Because the Churban was not from the Bavlim. The Churban was from a Kadosh Baruch Hu. However, this is not the final step. This is very far from the final step. What does she say about Hashem bringing the Churban. Asher olali, he, I can't even mention his name. Asher hoga Hashem biyom charon apo. What happened to me? He went ballistic. He's out of his mind. He's totally lost it. She blames the Churban on Hashem's anger. That is to say that she is adopting what Yirmiyahu had said in 5b, Ki Hashem hoga, Hashem caused her yagon, but she does not say anything about Sha'eha here. Here in Pasuk Yud Bet, what she's ready to acknowledge is that guy upstairs, he's crazy, man. He's ballistic. Asher hoga Hashem b'yom charon apo. Nothing about psha'im, nothing about my responsibility, but I am ready to understand that what happened here is not because of what the Bavlim did, but because of what a Kadosh Baruch Hu did. Or not a Kadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem. And he's very angry. He's an angry God. He is too angry. Too angry. And now she goes on to describe how this was entirely in excess. Minom shalach eish ba'atzmotai vayerdena. Paras reshet leraglai. Heshivani achor. He is cruel. He just look at all these ways that he looked to make me suffer. Netanani shomima kol hayom davai. Kol hayom dava. Now again, these are not the ways in which Yirmiyahu might speak about what had happened, but he is ready to give as an intermediate stage of her development. He's ready to give her the space to say, you did this. This is terrible what you did. I can't agree with any of this. I'm furious at what you did. You know, friends, it reminds me of a story. I was once at an academic conference, and I was sitting with two colleagues. We were at a dinner table. They were sitting one across from the other. The first one says to the other, he says, you know, I don't believe in God. The other guy sitting across says, you know, I don't either. And then the first guy says, but I'll tell you something. If I did believe in God, I would be very angry at him. And the second guy said, me too. And from that, I learned that the last step before abandoning religion is being angry at God. And so Yirmiyahu knows this as well, that when Am Yisrael at this time after the Churban are flirting with just abandoning it altogether, giving up on the whole thing, he needs to make room. He needs to legitimate the feelings of anger at a Kadosh Baruch Hu. And so these psukim here in Yud Bet, where she describes all the terrible things, Yud Gimel, what we read, all the terrible things that he did to her, there's a place for that. It's not the final line. This isn't the end line, the goal, but this is a stage. It is okay to be angry at a Kadosh Baruch Hu. If you tell someone, you can't be angry at me, you can't be angry at Kadosh Baruch Hu, you can't be angry, that doesn't work. There has to be a place for this. Pasuk Yud Daled. Here she moves to her next stage. She says, Niskad ol psha'ai biado. He has fashioned all of my psha'im as a yoke. Yistargu alu al tzavari hichshil kochi. Nitanani Adonai bidei lo uchal kum. Here too, Pasuk Yudalit, her next step up, because now she recognizes that what is going on here is not merely that Hashem is freaking angry, but that there's psha'im. This is the first time that she says this. But this is still not the final goal. Because what does she say about this? Niskado psha'ai biado, yistargu alu al tzavari, hichshil kochi, nitanani Adonai bidelo uchal kum, sila kol abirai Adonai bikirbi, kara alai moed lishpor bachurai. What she's saying here reminds me of something my kids used to say when they would be punished. They would say, oh, but Abba, okay, I did something wrong, but not that punishment. That's too much. And there used to be a negotiation about the punishment. Well, this is what she's doing here. She recognizes that it's from a Kadosh Baruch Hu. She recognizes now that it's her psha'im. It's too much. And she still says, I'm blaming you. What kind of crazy punishment is this? Now, at the end of Tedvav, Dat darach Adonai livtulat bat Yehuda This is back in third person. The Yirmiyahu has seen it proper now to interject. And whenever he interjects now, it will always be to mirror the things that she has said and go one more, to add, to emphasize, I would say to expand upon the painful things that she has said. Because in addition to Sila kol abirai Adonai bekirbi, kara alai mo'ed lishbor bachurai, he now says, Gat darach Adonai livtulat Yehuda. Just what does this mean? The Lord has trodden and oppressed the virgin daughter of Judah. So it means this. A gat is a wine press. You know, you take the grapes, you tread on the grapes, and you tread on the grapes, and all the juice comes out. Okay? Now, this is, when you're speaking about a betulah, is that what Yirmiyahu is really saying is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought about the rape of virgin girls. Right? The grapes, the whole bit. That's what's happening here. And it's Yirmiyahu saying that. And he's saying it in front of Bat Sion. He wants her to see that she's right. He is right in line with her. The painful things that she can describe, he can describe even more painful things, because he wants to encourage her to adopt the things that he had said at the beginning of the parak, that view that everything is ultimately her responsibility. Okay, let's see if we can pick up the pace here. Yeah, okay. Tet Zayin, the next stage of her development. Alela nibochia. Eni yordamayim kirachak mimeni menachem meshiv nafshi. This is a big step. Until now, every time that she has cried because of the pain that she is enduring. But now she says, kirachak mimeni menachem meshiv nafshi. And you can see here in the English that I have put menachem with a capital C. She is saying not that I don't have anyone to comfort me, but rachak mimeni ha-menachem. God is not here. Le'eshiv nafshi. Put differently, she realizes now that her relationship with Kadosh Baruch Hu is not all about suffer or not suffer. It's about wanting to be close to Him. This is a much higher madrega. There are some people, friends, for whom avodas Hashem is a very simple thing. Oh, will Hashem be a Santa Claus to me and give me nice things, or will I not get nice things? If I get nice things, then I love Hashem. And not nice things, well, then I'll have to, hopefully He'll give me nice things another time. It's all about whether I'm being treated well or not. But there's a higher level of avodas Hashem. I want to feel His presence. I want to feel that I have a kesher with Him. And that's what she's saying. Now what she's crying about is no longer solely about her sons, the Chorban, but the consequence of the Chorban is that she doesn't have connection. She wants that loving husband back, and he's not there. Rachak mimeni menachem meshiv nafshi. Hayuvanai shomimim ki gavar oyev. Suk Yud Zayin, back comes Yirmiyahu to mirror her pain back to her. Pesat Sion biyadeha. She spreads out her hands. When he says she spreads out her hands, and I hope you can see this with the camera, he is describing the way in which she said this phrase in Tet Zayin. She spreads out her hands like this. Kirachak mimeni menachem meshiv nafshi. Her hands are spread out up to Shemayim in all the directions. That is what Yirmiyahu is describing here. Persat Sion biyadeha. And if you think that's going to arouse the Kadosh Baruch Hu's sympathies, not yet. Ein menachem la. 17. Why? Because Dafka now, even as she's pining, not only for relief from the Chorban, but desiring to be back in touch with Him, to reestablish a kesher with Him. Yirmiyahu says that didn't happen now. Siva Shem Yaakov Sevivav Tzarav Hayta Yerushalayim L'nida B'neihem. Not only is He not here to comfort her, He is heaping on those that are going to bring her more tzarot, because that's going to be the reality. Pasuk Yudchet. She now moves one step higher in her spiritual maturation. Tzaddik Hashem Kifihu Mariti. She now exonerates a Kadosh Baruch Hu. It's no longer, okay. I did some stuff wrong. He freaked out. No. Tzaddiku Hashem kifihu mariti. Shim'una kol ha'amim u'ra'u ma'chovi. V'tultayu v'chorai halchu b'shevi. Karati l'ma'avai hema rimuni. This is now the next step. She says, now I understand. Karati l'ma'avai. I called out to my lovers. Hema Rimuni, right? She's now able to process everything and to understand and to connect the dots differently. I now understand. I turn to other husbands, other lovers, other treaty partners. Hema Rimuni. Kanayus Kenai Ba'ir Gavau. Kivakshu Och Lavo Ve'ashivu et Nafsham. Next step. Pasuk Chaf. Re'eh Hashem Kitzar Li. Now this is the third time that we have seen her say Re'eh Hashem. We saw above in Pasuk Tet that it started when she said Re'eh Hashem et onyi. But this wasn't so good. Ki Gilo Yev. We saw it got a little better. Re'eh Hashem va'abita k'ei zolilah. She drew attention to her suffering. But now look at what she wants Hashem to see here in Pasuk Chaf. Re'eh Hashem kitzar li. And why tzar li? Me'ai chomar maru nepach libi bikirbi kimaro mariti. I am so full of distress because I disobeyed HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because I drove him away. No longer a focus on material things, but the spiritual distance that she feels. That is what is foremost for her. She wants kesher with the Ribono Shel Olam. She wants to feel his presence. And so this is even a higher madrega. Let's go to Pasuk Chaf Aleph. We're closing in the end. What could be possibly higher than this? Right? She is now recognized the source of the Korban is her own avot, and that Hashem was a tzaddik in bringing the Korban. What could be higher? But we're only Pasuk Chaf, and we have to get to Pasuk Chaf Bet. So let's see what the last stages are. They're a little surprising. Pasuk Chaf Aleph. Sham'u kinena. Those other nations, they see what's happening with me. Kol oivai sham'u ra'ati sasu. They're all having a good time, those other nations. They're partying it up. Ki ata asita. Because of what you did. Heveta yom karata v'yuchamoni. Heveta, this is future, which is past. I want you, says Batson, to set a date for them and let them be like me. Let them experience Korban. Tavo kol ra'atam lefanecha. Let everything they have done come back to haunt them. The olel lamo, do to them kasher olalta li al kol psha'ai. I want you to do to them what you did to me because of all my averot. Now, this is the last phrase. This is it. Put differently, the ultimate level of Bat Sion's spiritual growth is nekama. I want revenge. We're a little uncomfortable with revenge, friends. Why? Revenge? This is the height of her spiritual growth? The answer is yes. But we have to understand it in the context of what's going on here. The reason that you now want to model revenge, or Bat Sion appealing to HaKadosh Baruch Hu to bring revenge on the enemies, is the following. Part of calling HaKadosh Baruch Hu to bring revenge is implicitly the recognition that he is capable of doing so, which is not at all obvious if you're living after the Korban. Because if you're living after the Korban, what you see is that Hashem is not in control, or you might come to that conclusion. And so as his model of what he wants Bat Sion to aspire to, he wants her to aspire to appealing to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and really believing that he is in control of everything that's going on. Revenge includes that. Moreover, not only that he controls all destiny, but that he is in fact concerned with her and concerned for a connection with her, that the brit is still on. That even though it looks like the brit is off, the brit is finished, if there ever was a brit, no, he is capable and he is interested in Am Yisrael. And so calling for revenge affirms the potency, his omnipotence, and affirms the belief that he is still interested in her, even though at present it seems like not. But at the same time, in asking for revenge, she still recognizes that this is all al kol psha'ai. Ultimately, I am responsible for this. Both anchotai v'libi davai. No happy ending. No, I believe it's going to be so. But right now, I am really suffering because right now, Am Yisrael is really suffering. And so these are all the stages of Bat Sion's spiritual growth. What we've had here, friends, is just what I said. The purpose of Eichah generally goes off and does different things in the subsequent prakim of Perek Aleph is to help guide Am Yisrael at this time, to give a prism through which to understand all the events that are happening. Its form is a dialogue, it's a drama that we see that Bat Sion, just like that woman in the ad that I saw washing her hands for a full minute, he wants Bat Sion to be that woman who's going to model perfected or perfecting behavior up and up and up, some 8 or 9 steps as a model for what Yirmiyahu hopes to see from Yerushalayim. Yirmiyahu only obliquely at a couple of occasions mentions Averot, but for the most part, most of what Yirmiyahu says here is mirroring her own pain and expanding upon her own pain, because it's through this that he earns her trust to engage in this constant growing process of self-introspection. And it is through this that the Vassal Treaty partner, Am Yisrael, will engage its sovereign king, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It is through this way that the wife, Am Yisrael, will once again find her way back to her husband, the Ribono Shel Olam. Adkan. Thank you all for tuning in.
Rabbi, thank you very much.
Yes.
If you don't mind, if you want to quickly take a look, I know it's late-ish, but if you maybe spend just a few minutes answering some of the questions, you want to take a look in the chat box. Otherwise, I can help say the question, but just take a look. Of course, I want to invite everybody. This Thursday, we won't be having our regular Tanach shiur, obviously, but we'll be having from 12 to 7 hours straight of Tisha B'Av programming. So we invite everybody. There's, I think, some great shiurim. I will mention Ari Zivitovsky's tour of Ir David and Pre-Chorban Yerushalayim will not be recorded. For those, I know lots of people always ask for the recording, but so that's on Tisha B'Av. We'll be continuing with Yirmiyahu on Monday. Tammy Chakowitz, Dr. Tammy Chakowitz will be teaching Yirmiyahu 11 a.m. Monday. And Rabbi, I hope I gave you a couple minutes to look at questions while I put in the filler commercials. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, well, very interesting. So here, and my apologies. I'm just kind of flipping around, trying to get past the things that are not questions. So here there's a listener, David Gelber. David Gelber says, perhaps Yirmiyahu saw where he failed prior to the Chorban. He failed to reach the people and is now trying a new approach. Wow. So that the growth here is not only for Bat Sion, but in himself as well. That's really beautiful. That is really beautiful. I like that. Oh, it's really something. Okay. Let's see. What else we got here?
Somebody wanted to ask, what happens if the sovereign betrays the vassal right at the beginning?
Okay. Well, okay.
I guess the implication, can God betray the Jewish people in a sense? I don't know if that was the meaning. But
This might be the way in which Bat Sion, this is clearly the way that Bat Sion sees it, right? When she says he's gone too far, he's flipped out, right? He's an abusive husband. One could say that, right? That is clearly how she says it. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Right. Yeah, I see that. Okay. What else do we have here? Someone pointed out Mizmor Kuf Lamed Zayin Al Narot Bavel. You want to see about revenge, you'd have to see the last 2 psukim there. Very difficult. I have some thoughts about that. In fact, I'm giving a talk about that. I'll be talking about Hashem's revenge. Yeah, let me make a little plug here. We're not so comfortable with the concept of revenge, but revenge is a huge part of Tanach and a huge part of the keynote on Tisha B'Av. And what's really fascinating, folks, is that the paradigm of Hashem's revenge. What does it mean that Hashem takes revenge? Revenge is such a human thing. It's nice to say Hashem is Chanun and Rachum, and we should be Chanun and Rachum. Hashem is Nokem, but we're not supposed to be Nokem. So what does it mean that Hashem takes revenge? What is the role of Am Yisrael in Hashem taking revenge? These are really interesting questions. And what's really interesting is that across the whole spectrum of our Masorah, from the Tanach, through the keynote, through the Middle Ages, through the keynote from the Shoah, the way in which Hashem's revenge is dealt with, plays itself out, changes and evolves over time. I'm going to be giving this shiur on this topic, including Mizmor Kuf Lamed Zayin Al Narot Bavel, which is incredibly vengeful. That'll be in Yirtzeh Hashem on Tisha B'Av Day. It's through Matan. If you look on the website of Matan, you'll see I'm giving that shiur here locally in Eretz Yisrael at around noon. That's a little early for those of you in North America, but I will be putting up the link to that shir. It'll be up on the Matan website. It'll be up on my Facebook page immediately after that shir. So the shir is called Shvo Chamatcha, the evolution of Hashem's revenge in our Tisha B'Av liturgy. So that'll be Amir Tashem Thursday, unless through some nace, big miracles happen and we have other things to celebrate this Tisha B'Av. And with that, Rabbi Kelman, I see that it is now 1/4 the hour. And so
okay. I want to thank you again very much. Very interesting share, the whole approach and the dialogue and really the introduction. We're going to thank you. And you see from all the comments how much people appreciated the share. So I want to thank you. And we look forward to learning with you again with Matan, Torah and Moshe, and everybody. It's wonderful. Everybody teaching Torah and we're all, striving for the same goal and many opportunities, many avenues to learn Torah. So we look forward to seeing everybody on happy occasions, and we look forward to Tisha B'Av becoming a holiday. But as you say, unless a miracle happens between now and tomorrow night, which in Israel is only about 25 hours away. So anyway, so we hope that you'll join us at least for part of our programming on Tisha B'Av. I do think it's a wonderful program, and we look forward to seeing you next week and continued opportunities. And thank you, everybody. Be well, be safe. Wash your hands for Italy. In Canada, they say only 20 seconds. They tell us here we have to wash hands for 20 seconds. Israel, a minute. Maybe Aruba. I'm sorry, that's 1 minute. Wow. So I do sometimes try to do 20 seconds. A minute, that's tough. Okay, very good. Thank you. Be well.
Kol tov.